A surgeon leans over the table, and everything in the room has narrowed to the space between her fingers. A needle finer than a hair, a thread she can barely see. She rolls it, turns it, ties a knot smaller than a grain of rice, and does it again and again, faster than the eye can follow, while a life waits under the light. Her hands move as if they think for themselves, each finger arriving exactly where it is needed, gripping, releasing, adjusting by a fraction. She is not thinking about her hands at all. She is thinking about the work. And she has no idea that the instrument she is using, the most precise tool on the planet, is not a human invention. It is a fish fin, remade. The same bones that once pushed a heavy body through ancient swamp water are the bones now tying that impossible knot, and they have been in the family for hundreds of millions of years. We like to believe the hand is the crown of being human, the thing that separates us from the animals, built for tools, for language written in gesture, for holding another person's fingers in the dark. That is the story we tell. And it is beautifully, almost entirely wrong. Your hand is not a new thing at all. It is an old fin, reworked, and the plan for it was drawn not by anything human, but by a fish learning to survive in water that was slowly killing it. Here is the part that should stay with you as you flex your fingers. That ancient blueprint is not a fossil sealed in stone. It is inside your hand right now, the very same skeleton, the very same instructions, running in the fingers that hold your phone. To understand why you have a hand and not a fin, we cannot start with humans. We have to rewind, far past the first people, past the first apes, past the first animals that ever walked, back to a warm and stagnant world where our ancestors had no legs, no fingers, no notion of dry land, and swam on fins of flesh and bone. So carry two questions with you as we sink down into deep time. Where did the hand actually come from in a body that lived entirely underwater? And once it was built for one desperate purpose, why has it never been thrown away, only reshaped again and again, all the way down to you? Begin in the water, because the hand was born there. Picture a world of vast, shallow, weed-choked swamps, warm and heavy and low on oxygen. The kind of water that leaves a fish gasping at the surface. In that world swam a creature you would call a fish, and mostly be right. But its fins were strange. Not the thin, fan-like fins of the fish you know, held out on delicate rays. These fins were fleshy, muscular, thick at the base, with real bones inside them. Lobe fins. And tucked within those lobes was a pattern of bone that should stop you cold. Because you are carrying it right now. Look at the bones inside that ancient fin, and the story is already written. One bone at the top, joining the fin to the body. Then two bones below it, side by side. Then a scatter of smaller bones beyond. One bone, two bones, many bones. Now look at your own arm. One bone in your upper arm, the humerus. Two bones in your forearm, side by side. Then a cluster of little bones in your wrist, opening out into fingers. It is the same design, the same sequence, in the same order, laid down in a fish that never left the water. Your arm is not like that fin. Your arm is that fin, stretched and slimmed and finished across an unimaginable gulf of time. It helps to stand in that ancient world for a moment because it was harsh in a way ours is not. The air itself held less of what a body needs, and the warm, shallow water held even less. Great tangled plants had spread through the margins of every lake and river, turning open water into a green, clogged maze. Rotting vegetation stole the oxygen from the shallows, so that on a still, hot day, a fish could suffocate in water that looked perfectly alive. This was not a paradise our ancestors were leaving. It was a slow trap they were trying to survive, and the fin with bones inside it was one of the few tools that gave them a way out. But a bone pattern in a swamp is a long way from a surgeon's hand, so the story cannot stop at a diagram. It has to explain why. Why would a fish build heavy, bony, muscular fins in the first place, when thin fins move so beautifully through open water? The answer is in that dying, oxygen-poor swamp. Thin fins are wonderful in clear, deep water, but they are useless in a crowded, shallow, tangled world. In the weed-choked shallows, a fish needed to do something else entirely. It needed to push, to shove its body through submerged plants, to prop itself against the muddy bottom, to lever forward where there was barely enough water to swim. A fin you can lean on, a fin with bones and muscle, a fin that can bear weight, suddenly beats a fin you can only wave. The heavy limb was not built to walk. It was built to push through water that had become a trap. And that is the first great reversal of this story. The bones of your hand were not designed for land at all. They were designed for water, for a fish struggling through a swamp so choked and airless that a limb able to prop and push meant the difference between reaching the next pool and dying in the mud. Every time you lean on your palm, every time you push yourself up from a chair, you are using the fin for exactly what it was first made to do. The pushing came first. The land came much later. And this is the thread we follow now, because that weight-bearing fin was about to be handed the strangest job of all. And we are not guessing at this passage from the fin, because the creatures caught halfway through it were pressed into the rocks and found again. Picture one of them, a flat-headed fish lying in the shallows with eyes set high on top of its skull, watching the world above the waterline. It still had scales and gills. It still lived in the water. But its front fins were thick and jointed, strong enough to prop its chest up off the bottom, so it could lift its head into the air and breathe. It was neither fish nor beast, but something in between, a living hinge in the story. When you see its skeleton, you see the fin and the hand at the same time, caught in the middle of becoming one another. So what happened when the water finally ran out? Roll the clock forward and picture those swamps shrinking under a harsh sky, pools drying to mud, the water growing more crowded and more deadly by the season. A fish that could only swim was trapped in a pool that was vanishing. But a fish with sturdy, bony fins could do the unthinkable. It could drag itself, heave its body up on those fleshy limbs, and haul out across the mud to the next pool, the next stretch of water, the next chance to live. It was not trying to conquer the land. It was trying to escape a death trap. And the fin that could push through weeds turned out to be the fin that could push against the ground. Imagine that first heave onto the mud, a body never meant to leave the water, dragging itself into blinding air, ribs straining, the fleshy fins digging into the silt and shoving. Most such attempts must have ended badly, a fish stranded and gasping. But some made it, pool to pool, mudflat to mudflat, and each one that survived carried fins a little better at bearing weight. The land was not a prize being claimed. It was a gauntlet being crossed, and the limb was being forged in the crossing. Here the pattern in the bones begins to matter more than ever. Those first heaves onto the mud put a demand on the fin that open water never had. The limb had to bear the whole weight of the body against gravity, something no swimming fish ever needed. And the fin answered with the parts it already had. The single upper bone became a true upper arm, strong enough to hold the body up. The paired lower bones became a forearm that could bend and turn. The small bones at the tip began to spread, to grip, to find purchase in the mud. Nothing new had to be invented. The old one bone, two bone, many bones fin was simply pressed into a harder job and reshaped by the pressure of it. This is the quiet genius of how bodies change. Evolution rarely builds a new thing from raw material. It takes what is already there and leans on it until it bends into a new shape. The fin did not vanish so a limb could appear in its place. The fin itself was bent, bone by bone, into the limb, keeping its entire underlying plan even as its purpose was rewritten. Nothing was thrown out. Everything was reused. The limb was becoming a leg, and the fin was becoming a hand, without a single part being added from nowhere. And this is where the deepest secret of the hand comes out. The reason this is a story about you and not just about fish. How does a body know how to build one bone, then two, then many, in that exact order, whether it is making a fin or a hand? Because the instructions are written in genes, ancient genes that lay out the limb from shoulder to fingertip, and those same genes were already running in the fish. The genetic recipe that patterns your fingers is a slightly edited version of the recipe that patterned the rays of a lobe fin. The tools that build a hand are the tools that built a fin. They were not created for us. They were inherited, nearly whole, and merely tuned. When a human embryo grows its hand, it is running software written in the water, long before there were hands to run it on. Watch that process in a growing embryo, and the deep past surfaces before your eyes. The tiny limb begins as a small bud, and within it the bones lay themselves down in the old unmistakable order. First one, then two, then the fan of many. The hand does not appear all at once, fully formed. It is assembled by the same sequence of instructions that shaped a lobe fin, followed step by step, in silence, weeks before a child is born. You did not just inherit a hand. You inherited the recipe, and every one of us runs it again from the beginning. But this raises the real mystery, the puzzle that turns a curiosity into something stranger and deeper. If the hand and the fin are built by the same ancient instructions, why did our line keep and elaborate the fingers, while so many other animals took the very same starting kit and buried it, hid it, or nearly threw it away? A horse runs on what was once its middle finger. Its other digits shrunk to splints. A whale sealed its hand bones back inside a flipper and returned to the sea. A bat stretched the same fingers into impossibly long struts to hold a wing. Same blueprint, wildly different fates. Line up their skeletons side by side, and the shock is how alike they remain beneath the surface. The horse hoof, the bat wing, the whale flipper, the human hand. All of them still show the one bone, then two, then the cluster of many. The proportions are stretched or shrunk almost past recognition. One digit swollen huge, another shriveled to a splinter. But the plan underneath is the same plan. The same fin, wearing a different disguise on each branch of the family. So why did the human line hold on to the open five-fingered hand, almost unchanged in its basic plan, when the pressure to specialize was pulling every other branch away from it? To answer that, we have to think like a detective. Lay out the suspects. The first idea is that the five-fingered hand survived in us because it was constantly being perfected for grasping, refined generation after generation into the tool we know. But that suspect only tells half the truth. The deeper reason is quieter and stranger. The generalized hand survived in our line largely because it was never forced to become something else. A horse's ancestors were driven onto open plains where speed was everything, and speed reshaped the hand into a hoof. A bat's ancestors took to the air, and flight stretched the hand into a wing. Our ancestors, climbing through trees and later handling objects, never faced a pressure extreme enough to sacrifice the hand's openness. The five-fingered plan was not aggressively improved so much as it was left free, kept flexible, never locked into a single narrow use. And that is the button on the mystery. The hand persists in the shape it does because it is the least specialized version of an ancient, deeply shared blueprint. A plan so fundamental to how a limb is built that it cannot be discarded, only modified. Evolution never got to start over and design a hand from scratch. It could only take the fin it already had and bend it toward each new life. In horses it bent toward running, in bats toward flying, in whales back toward swimming, and in us it bent hardly at all, leaving the old open hand nearly intact, free to grip a branch, a stone, a tool, a needle. We did not win the best hand by building a better one. We kept the original general form while others spent theirs on speed and flight, and that unspent openness is exactly what makes the human hand so powerful. There was one more stretch of the journey that mattered, high above the ground. Long after the limb had learned to walk, a branch of our ancestors moved up into the trees, and there the open hand found a new calling. A life among branches rewards a limb that can wrap and grip, that can close around a bough and trust its whole weight to that grip. The thumb drew away from the fingers. The palm learned to cup. The old fin, which had once pushed through weeds and heaved across mud, was now curling around living wood, holding a body safe in the canopy. And when later ancestors came back down and began to pick up stones and shape them, that same gripping hand was already waiting, general enough to do 1,000 things it was never designed for. So now, the whole picture comes together, and it reaches all the way back to that gasping fish. The reason you have a hand and not a fin is not that evolution replaced one with the other. It is that the fin never left. It was reshaped, step by step, by a single unbroken chain of pressures. Push through the weeds, prop against the mud, haul across the drying flats, climb through the branches, grip the tool. At no point did anything start fresh. The same bones, the same order, the same ancient genes, carried forward and gently rewritten at every stage, until a limb built to shove a fish through a swamp had become a limb that could tie a knot inside a beating heart. And here is where the surgeon comes back, because her hands are the end of that chain. When her fingers find their exact positions without being told, they are obeying a body plan drawn up in Devonian water. The single bone in her upper arm, the paired bones in her forearm, the little bones of her wrist fanning into fingers. Every one of them is the lobe fin, still here, still working. The precision that saves a life on that table is the distant grandchild of a fin that once saved a fish's life in a shrinking pool. The purpose changed beyond recognition. The plan never did. Now step back and feel the full reach of it. We began with a surgeon tying an impossible knot, her hands moving like something wiser than thought. We ended in a warm, dying swamp, watching a heavy-finned fish drag itself toward the next pool on limbs that carried, hidden inside them, the design of every hand that would ever come after. That hand, at the end of your arm, is not the crown of being human, invented fresh for us. It is a fish fin that never stopped being useful, passed down and reworked through every ancestor between that swamp and you. And here is what stays once you understand it. The hand is not finished, not a relic, not a monument to how special we are. It is a living inheritance, running the same deep instructions today that it ran in the water, building the same bones in the same order in every child still growing in the womb. Every time you grip, every time you reach, every time your fingers close around something you love, you are using a fin that learned to push through a swamp, still doing what it has always done, still finding purchase in the world. So the next time your hand does something delicate and certain, without you even watching it, remember what it truly is. Not a crown, not an invention. The made-over fin of a creature that hauled itself out of dying water an unimaginably long time ago, still wired into you, still following a plan older than land itself. If that thought settles into your fingers even a little, then stay with me. Your body is full of these deep inheritances, ancient tools reshaped into new lives, and every one of them carries a story just as old and just as alive as this one.